There are themes running through it, which I will sort of allude to as we grow along. The main theme is how the town and the university, or the college, or the institute, or the schools, as they've severally been, have come together at various points and influenced the direction in which each and the other have gone. They're very closely interwoven, and at one or two points, they're also interwoven with the history of Wycombe High School, of the Boys' Grammar School, of John Hampden School, of Lady Verney School, and of other educational establishments. That is the, through art and industry, Arte et Industria, took the liberty of translating us through. It should probably be by, but that's actually the motto of the university. Now, first question to ask is, why are we in High Wycombe? Because after all, the original county town was Buckingham, and then from the reign of Henry VIII, the county town became Aylesbury, and has remained so. Why High Wycombe? Well, there are three answers there, and there are others. First of all, a water supply. High Wycombe has always had streams coming through it, and a spring, springs all over the place. In fact, there's a huge, great spring underneath this university, which was a thorough nuisance when they were building these buildings. Its position, it's equidistant between London and Oxford, and that's important because of travelling and so on and so forth. The A40 has always been, the Oxford Road, a major trunk road in this country. And the reason above all was that more than either of the other towns, Aylesbury or Buckingham, it was a centre of trade and industry. The population in High Wycombe as early as 1800 was 13,000, which is really quite large when you think it was a county of 57,000 people. So Wycombe was the logical place because of water, because of where it was, and because it was a centre of trade and industry. Now that's an example of one of the ponds that used to exist on the River Wye. The river comes through the town, as you know, and at various points on that, in the early days, there were mills. There were in fact 11 water mills along the valley here, and that was another reason, because there was proximity to water, that Wycombe was a logical place to grow. Now the early industries in this town were four main industries: the manufacture of cloth, the making of lace, and later the making of paper and, of course, furniture. The manufacture of cloth was done by some of the mills, and in fact some of the mills changed from being water mills to being mills that would produce cloth. So those are the early industries in Wycombe. Wycombe became a borough very early on. But it had its charter well before many other towns in the area. It had its charter and its ability to have a market in the 12th century, 12th and 13th centuries. Now the advantage that Wycombe had, of course, was the River Wye. And you've already seen one photograph of a mill pond. This is one of the early industries. This was a machine which could produce, you had the water wheel there, and this was for fulling of cloth. And that's one of the early industries of the town. This would have been about the 15th century. Now this is another example of one of the local industries, which of course was lace making. And here you have a lady sitting outside her cottage producing lace, and as you can see, she's got her bobbins there and the square lace producing pillow that they use to make lace. Now lace is still made in High Wycombe, and I've got an example of a very early piece of High Wycombe lace, which is absolutely beautiful. And there still are people who, of course, get indulged. This is a very early piece of High Wycombe lace, and was one of the early industries in the town. There was also a series of mills which were built along the river, and these were mainly for making paper, and some mills were converted for fulling, and because the water here contained a lot of chalk, which was useful for making fabrics. We had many bakers in this area because the court at both London and when the court came down to Woodstock and Oxford wanted bread, and a lot of the bread was actually produced in Wycombe and then brought up to London. So we had quite a lot of early industry in the town. Now, the other industry, of course, that grew up in the town was the making of furniture. And this is an example of a bodger up in the woods, because we had just the right kind of trees for furniture making. And there you see them. They turned the legs and the spines of the famous chairs in the woods, and then they were brought down into the town. And the very earliest example of that kind of chair, which is a typical Windsor chair made in High Wycombe, was produced in 1731. So we've been making chairs and furniture in this town for a very long time. Originally, they were lone chair makers in their own homes, in their back gardens, but gradually it developed into a local industry, producing furniture, perhaps in a group of people working together. Perhaps it was one man did one part, another man did another part. But the furniture industry arose out of the fact that we had the right kind of woods around the town. And you got these itinerant turners, or bodgers as they were known. Their main wood was beech, but they also used ash and they also used other woods. So that's the background to High Wycombe, that it was a place where industry had started, firstly supplying bread and food to London and to the Royal Court when it came out to Woodstock and various other places. Partly making lace and partly making paper. That's the other thing that was made in High Wycombe. And indeed, in Loudwater, they produced a paper until I think it was the last mill making paper closed in 1999. So that's been another industry which has been part of the town. And I dare say you've all know people who have worked in the paper industry in the town, because it continued right up into the end of the last century. So High Wycombe was a place where there was a developed industrial base, and that is the reason more than anything else that contributed towards the fact that it was at Wycombe and not either at Aylesbury or at Buckingham that the higher education or the further education of adults began to grow. Now this is a slide of the High Street of High Wycombe in the 18th century, late 18th century. And education in High Wycombe varied depending upon your social class. If you were very rich, then you were educated at home by a tutor, and then you went off to Eton or Oxford, or Eton or one of the other main public schools in the area. And there was no public school in Oxford, in Wycombe, but very interestingly, there was a school at the end of the 18th century for military officers. And it was located just here. This is the High Street. That's where Woolworths was, and that is just next door. It was called the Antelope, and as you can see there, there's a military box there, And that was because there was always a guard along the road in High Wycombe. They could be called out if there was trouble with highwaymen. They could be called out if there were any riots in the town. And consequently, there was a military presence in the town from a very early time. And it was decided, just at the end of the 18th century, that they would have a school for military officers there. And it was located in the Antelope, which was here. And it was the governor of it was a man called Sir John Gaspard Le Marchant. And it became eventually the senior section of Sandhurst, the Royal Military College. Sandhurst actually started here in High Wycombe. And the junior section was down in Marlow, and they came together and formed the Royal Military College at Sandhurst. And that was one of the earliest forms of education in the town. Now this is an old drawing of what used to be the Royal Grammar School. It was actually founded by Royal Charter in 1562. So there has always been a grammar school in High Wycombe since the reign of Elizabeth I. And that's a picture of it, a Victorian picture of it, and that's what it looked like until well into the 19th century. There were also in the town a number of private schools for middle-class children. There was Haddo's School. There was a private school for young ladies in Frogmore. And if you had a little bit of money, there was some education in High Wycombe, but not, unfortunately, for the poor. Now, this is the Methodist Sunday School, and it was founded by Hannah Ball in 1769. And then it was followed by 1834. It had 350 pupils, and then they also there's the Methodist Church there, and the school was there. And it by the middle of the 19th century, it had some 400 pupils. There was also a school founded in 1813 called the Lancasterian School, which eventually moved to Easton Street, and then in 1830 became the British School, and eventually in 1875 it became the Board School in Priory Road. Another school which was in existence in High Wycombe was the National School in White Hart Street, and that's a photograph of what it looked like. The couple of police there, because it was just around the corner from the police station. And that eventually became the Lokes Road School. So there were these two early schools in High Wycombe. And then, of course, you had what were called dame schools, and that's a photograph taken in Newlands, where you had one child there reading to very bored-looking children there, and their mothers standing by. There wasn't a lot of education in the town for the children of the poor. There was also a type of school known as the lace schools, which were in fact schools where people went along and learnt to make lace, but they were also read to. So they had a certain amount of education. And that was what education was like in Wycombe, let's say by about 1830, 1840. You had the short-lived school of the military training. You then had the Royal Grammar School. You had a few private schools. Mr. Haddo's School was one. And then you had the dame schools, and you had the British School and the National School. But there was none of it was completely free, apart from the Royal Grammar School. which was free. Now, pre-1870, what about further education? Well, there wasn't a great deal. There was a Mechanics Institute. Now, the Mechanics Institutes started in Glasgow in about 1821, and they spread throughout the country, and one was established in High Wycombe, a Mechanics Institute. There was also a Literary and Scientific Institute, and there was a Mutual Improvement Society. Now, these three institutions provided a certain amount of further education for people who had left school, and of course people left school very young in those days. And the Mutual Improvement Society also was a way of saving money. It was a mutual society for saving money. Now, the catalyst was 1870, when state education came finally to this town. In 1870 there was the Foster Education Act, and that enabled the start of elementary education, free elementary education for youngsters up to the age of 14. But at the same time, the head of the British school, one Mr. Tottle, started running adult evening classes, and they were the first forerunner of this institution. And Mr. Tottle was then made headmaster of the board school, which was opened in 1875 in Hamilton Road. The national school continued as a voluntary parish school. So the British school became the board school, and the national school continued as a voluntary parish school. And also, in the late 1870s, a very well-known philanthropist called James Griffiths established the very first free library for people of High Wycombe, and it contained about 600 volumes in the former British school building, which was vacated when they opened the board school. A very significant event occurred in 1870 when the Royal Grammar School moved out of the ancient building I showed you and moved into this purpose-built school, which of course is still there in Easton Street. It was designed by a man called Vernon, who designed quite a lot of buildings, including the Hamilton Road School, the Priory Road School, I beg its pardon, in the town. And here you can just see what was left of the old grammar school. They pulled a lot of it down and left just the framework of the old medieval St John's Priory, which had been there up until the Reformation. So there you have your first major secondary school in High Wycombe, in the new Royal Grammar School in Easton Street, which was opened in 1883. So that's the background. That's the amount of education. Had you lived in High Wycombe in 1880, 1883, that's what there was available. So if you were lucky, you might get to go to the Royal Grammar School, although the education there was classics, which wasn't terribly useful. If you weren't going to specialise in classics for the rest of your life, it wasn't exactly practical. You also got the British schools with a certain amount of primary education, the national school with a certain amount of primary education. You now had the board school with the school board running it, and you got the Royal Grammar School, which very nearly closed in about 1830. It was down to about 12 boys and a dog. It was really very, very close thing, but then it was taken over by a new board and expanded. Now, what really enabled this institution to come into existence were three acts of Parliament. There was the County Councils Act in 1888, and that established the county councils, including, of course, Buckinghamshire County Council. And then a year later, there was the Technical Instruction Act. Now, that act enabled the setting up of technical schools and similar institutions across the country. And then finally, another act was a spirits tax. In 1889, the government decided in its wisdom not only to tax beer, but also to tax spirits, in particular whiskey. And in 1890, it was decided that some of the money raised from this whisky tax should be ploughed back into the communities. And Buckinghamshire received £5,000, which was a very large sum of money in those days, to distribute round the county in order to benefit education. And the grant that High Wycombe got was £500 from the whisky tax. And with that money, which wasn't enough, they decided to found the Science, Art and Technical Schools, and the organising secretary was Mr. Pycroft. And Miss Pycroft, his daughter, was the very first person to win, to gain a certificate of education from that establishment. She was a well-known young lady, and she did a course in design, in art, and she got herself a certificate. Now, this therefore was the beginning. This is the ancestor of this university, the Science, Art and Technical Schools in 1891. Now, they didn't have a proper building. They were in the old British schools. So they set about raising money to build themselves their own building. And they had a fancy fair and bazaar in the grounds of Wycombe Abbey, which was still a private residence, about to become a girls' school in 1896. And they raised £1,000, which wasn't quite enough, but they raised enough to start building the schools. And the building that they put up, of course, is still there. It's in Frogmore. It's now known as Clock House, and that was where this university saw its origins. And then 7 years later, there was a district committee for technical education set up, and 2 years later, a higher education committee in High Wycombe, the chair of whom was Miss Dove. You may have heard of the formidable Miss Dove. She was the first headmistress of Wycombe Abbey School. She was also the first chairman of governors of Wycombe High School, my school, when it was first founded. Now that is a contemporary photograph of the great bazaar in the grounds of Wycombe Abbey. It's a bit difficult to see because but you can see all these various stalls, and it was open, I think, for 3 days, and there was jousting and all this sort of thing, and it raised enough money to open that building. So we are an institution that was founded on a combination of whisky money and jousting. And there it is. That is a contemporary photograph of the building, and you'll know it. And as you can see, it's before the days of cars. And this building here also featured, because when it got too big, they spread over there as well. That's just by the railway arch, as you know, near what used to be Sainsbury's. Now, most of the classes took place in the evenings because the people who came to the classes were mainly working during the day, and they came along in the evenings or at the weekends. And so the buildings weren't that busy in the daytime. And so in 1901, a second institution took residence in the buildings in Frogmore. Frogmore, incidentally, was donated by Mr. Griffiths, the same benefactor who'd built the library for people in the town. And they opened Wycombe High School in September of 1901 with just 18 girls, 11 of whom failed the entrance test, as I recall. And the school stayed there under Mary Christie, their first head, until they got their own buildings in 1906. Mr. Pycroft left in 1902, and there was a new organising secretary called Hamilton Haddow, who also ran a school in the town, for a private school for young boys. And by 1909, there were already 800 students at these schools. And it absolutely flourished. More courses, there was an art master called Mr. Byfield, there was the Mr. Haddow taught, Mr. Pycroft in his day taught, and gradually the staff who were mainly part-time, also used to work at the other schools. Byfield, for example, taught the girls at the high school. He also worked down in Marlow at Borlase's. And then an interesting thing happened. The art school became separate from the rest of the college. And from then onwards, the art college functioned by itself, more or less, and the technical and scientific work was the one that grew and expanded under the next organising secretary, who was called Arthur Gardam. And so the schools, the ancestor of this university, began to flourish and began to grow, and the numbers, as you can see, already expanding. Now, it wasn't free. There was a small fee, but nevertheless, it was providing a service, the first service of further education in this town. When World War, or just before World War I started, another event occurred which affected the history of this institution, because the Royal Grammar School moved. It had already outgrown the buildings that I showed you that it moved into in the 1880s, and it moved up to the new buildings on the top of Amersham Hill. Not the front bit, that was added later, but the buildings for the Royal Grammar School, which was expanding, were opened in 1914, and that left the Eastern Street site vacant. And it was decided that the schools would move into that institution. The art section would stay behind in Frogmore, and the rest of the schools, the technical instruction, the scientific instruction, and also by this time it was a pupils' school, it was training teachers, they could move over to Eastern Street, because they were now offering, as you can see there, art, craft, science, commercial and domestic subjects. They had both boys, or young men, and girls there. However, the war broke out, and Wycombe High School were kicked out of their building in what is now Benjamin Road, and they had to move out in order to allow that building to become a military hospital. In fact, they were kicked out twice. First of all, they were kicked out and they had 2 days in which to find somewhere. Miss Christie found some buildings in the town. The second time, when they were told that they had to move, they moved into the Eastern Street site. So in the morning, the Eastern Street site was Wycombe High School. Then the girls went off home, and then in the afternoon they nursed wounded soldiers in their original old school in Benjamin Road. And then in the afternoon, the arts and the technical school operated on that site in the afternoon and in the evening. Now, Wycombe was transformed during World War I. There were army camps. There were 3 regiments stationed here. The population expanded by 27,000 soldiers, and they had to be fed, and all the church and parish halls were opened so that these soldiers who came and went obviously could be fed. And there was munitions work, and the main production in this town, contributing to the war, was the production of aircraft parts. Wycombe became well known for the production of aircraft parts. And I've got 1 or 2 pictures to show you. There is a group of people outside one of the college buildings with a propeller that they produced, made of wood, of course, during the World War I. There was never a plane that flew from High Wycombe, but nevertheless, they were producing aircraft parts. And it was also became a training centre for wounded ex-servicemen. They were brought back from the front, and they were trained to produce furniture, and they'd spend so much time in buildings at the rear of the Eastern Street, and then they'd go into the factories in Wycombe and learn their trade as furniture makers. And there were a lot of partially wounded, limbless ex-servicemen working in the Eastern Street establishment, learning to be furniture makers. We've had that one. Now, this particular piece of furniture was made by those men in 1919 into 1920. It is a set of lockers made in wood, and it was carved as a war memorial to the men of High Wycombe who'd been killed during World War I. And it is a series of lockers with various inscriptions on them, and across the top it says that it is a war memorial. And that was completely lost. It's a piece of work done by these ex-servicemen, was completely lost. And then Andrew McTavish, whom some of you will know, was ferreting around in a cupboard at the Chair Museum in High Wycombe, and he found this piece of furniture. He liberated it, and it's now in the foyer of John Hampden Grammar School. So if ever you go up there, it's in the atrium. Do ask to see it, because it is a piece of our college history. Now, in between the two world wars, you'd now got a technical institute operating out of Easton Street. You still had the art school in Frogmore House, and by law, it was enabled to open a junior technical day school for boys. And when Arthur Garden came back from the front, he became the head teacher of this new junior day technical school. So on the Easton Street site, you had the Easton Street Institute of Further Education, and you also had the school for boys. That gradually extended to have girls in as well, doing commercial subjects. For a while it was a pupil teacher centre, trainee teachers were there, but then they moved out in 1923, and in 1925 Frogmore, the original building, was sold. And in its history since then, it's been a swimming bath, a theatre, it was nearly pulled down, and now of course it is offices. Arthur Garden suddenly died in 1931, and he was replaced by William Davis, who was the new principal and head. And the college grew and grew and grew, and it was already growing beyond the confines of the Easton Street building. And as early as 1933, where there was a proposal to build on the Alexandra Road site, where the university now stands. But the idea was shelved because of the imminence of war in 1938. And that's a lovely photograph of some of the boys who went to that school between the wars, and some of the masters there. I wonder how many of those are still alive. World War II, High Wycombe was also greatly involved. The town hosted RAF and of course American forces, and as you know, Wycombe Abbey, among other places, was host to airmen, and the institute also took in refugees during the war, or evacuees, from Shoreditch, and the trade school at Shoreditch. And so the college was bursting at the seams with boys from Shoreditch, and the girls from Shoreditch were educated at Limehouse, which was next door. During the war, finally, a junior school of art was set up, and a bit later on, a junior technical building school. And in 1945, as part of the Butler Education Act, all the junior technical schools were amalgamated to form the Secondary Technical School of High Wycombe, which was a sort of partner to the Royal Grammar School and to the Girls' High School. And in 1946, the Technical Institute became known as the Wycombe Technical College and School of Art. During the war, they made propellers, lots and lots of propellers in High Wycombe, and also parts for mosquitoes. And there's some ladies there in one of the furniture factories in High Wycombe making parts for mosquitoes. Another thing which evolved during the war and into the 1940s was the so-called utility furniture. And these are some examples of pieces of furniture that were made in High Wycombe at the time. My mother, certainly, I don't know about yours, but she had a table just like that, and the flaps opened and we could sort of wobble it, you know, like, and you had these various styles of chairs. They were part of the change, the gradual change, because High Wycombe started to make a different style of furniture as the interwar years passed by. Now, I'd already mentioned before the war they had thought of moving to Alexandra Road because the site was so full, and eventually they started to make moves to build what is now the University College on the Alexandra Road site. And there it mentions the 3 phases. First of all, the site was cleared, then you had the various workshops and the opening of the new buildings, and then in 56 to 8, the next phase of the buildings. Let's have a look at that. Now that's what the site looked like. That is now Staples. So are you with me where we are? We're more or less standing somewhere about, yeah, I should think. Yes, London Transport, wasn't it, Ronald? Yes, that's right. And this is another view taken across the building site looking at the parish church. Of course, there was no flyover there in those days to obscure the view. And you have a lot of old cottages and things which are no longer there. So that's what the site looked like when it was being cleared. And gradually, different buildings were put up on the site. But there were other changes going on. In 1957, the girls' part of the technical school left, and they moved into Hampden Road as the Lady Verney High School. And they moved into Hampden Road because Wycombe High School had gone up the hill, Marlow Hill. And they had a new head teacher there. The deputy head had also been deputy head at the technical school. In 1960, the then principal of the college, Mr. Davis, retired. We don't know why, but he apparently retired under a cloud. He's supposed to have said to the incoming principal, Mr. Everett, "Here's your chair, goodbye." And that was allegedly his introduction. This is an apparent, officially, Mr. Davis never darkened the college doors again. But this isn't quite true, because some very clued up person, not me, I must say, pointed out that in a photograph of the opening of the main buildings in 1963, Mr. Davis can be seen in the background. Anyway, Mr. Everett was appointed as principal of the college and the very first vice principal of the college, and there was a separate head for the first time of the technical school, a man called Horace Ward, who eventually became the first headmaster of John Hampden Grammar School. And as you see, in 1966, the boys moved there. So the junior technical school disappeared and became John Hampden and Lady Verney. Just some pictures of the various phases of the building. That's taken in 1958. And the various phases of the building came in between 1951, 1955 and 1958. And these are the later phases of the building, 62, and this will be familiar to quite a few of them in this room, and do correct me if there's something wrong there. The hospital, so-called hospital wing, was built. The refectory, before that, they had to have their meals at one of the British restaurants that they reopened. Then the main opening of the whole college was in May 16th, 1963. And then gradually various phases, and many of you in this room will be familiar with these phases. The North Block, where we are now, I think, the Youth Centre, the Timberlake buildings, the famous Red Shed, the Rose Garden, the famous Owen Harris building, which quite often these lectures are held in, Student Union venue, and the Red Shed infill. These are the gradual stages through which this site was built. And of course, as the college expanded, so did its provision. The first degree course for the college was actually, I think it says here, it was in sociology, and it was on the 14th of October 1966 that it was agreed that they should deliver that course. So the first degree course was available in 1966. And then there was a BA Honours in Furniture, and they went on to a Master of Arts degree not long after that. Now, the interesting thing was that this college building now had the only hall, other than the town hall, available in the town. There was no Swan. There were school halls, of course. There was the boys' school hall and the girls' school hall. But in the town centre, this college had the only decent hall available. Now, the then head of the music department, Peter Goodwin, and Mr. Swen's here, set up a whole range of productions of all sorts of plays. And there was, for example, Dido and Aeneas. There was a performance of Dido and Aeneas. There were concerts by famous performers like Clifford Curzon, Joan Hammond, the famous soprano. There was a High Wycombe Opera Society that operated out of that site. And there was a range of productions like Trial by Jury, The Beggar's Opera. And the college became the cultural centre of the town. And I think that this is a tradition which we are trying to continue to this day. It is a tradition which started when the college was back in its former Frogmore position, where they would open it up for art exhibitions and for performances, and it's gone right through the history of the college. The college was expanding, and so you get other campuses. Huntercombe Manor, which once belonged to Bucks County Council, they were asked to take over, and the college ran courses and used it for conferences, and there was a language laboratory there between 1970 and 1982. And I know Brian Mogford, who's here today, was very much involved in the taking over that and running it as a profitable undertaking. And then in 1975, Buckinghamshire County Council had 2 teacher training centres, one at Newland Park and one up at Milton Keynes. And from 1975 onwards, it asked the university, what is now the university, the then college, to become involved in running Newland Park. Now, Dr. Everett would have liked to have continued to run a teacher training college, but that was not possible. And it was instead developed as the management centre. It also produced courses in foreign languages. It had business there, and of course later on the nursing section of the college was also there. And then of course Missenden Abbey. In 1984 the college took a charge under the aegis of Bucks County Council, Missenden Abbey, and that became a conference centre which was used by teachers, it was used by the college, it was let out, and generally became a company which made a profit for the university, for the college from time to time. Not always. In 1984, Missenden Abbey had no sooner had the college taken over, virtually, the place was damaged by a major fire. Many of you will remember it, I'm sure. And it took until 1986 or 7 for the whole of that building to be restored, which Bucks County Council did in a most sympathetic way. Later on, the college lost when the college became independent, which it did of Bucks County Council, it lost the Eastern Street site, and so had to relocate those parts of the college which had been at the Eastern Road site at other places, and one of them was the former Pembroke School, which is now part of Amersham and Wycombe College. There were rooms in the Octagon, and eventually in 1995 they also took possession of the former Lady Verney High School, which closed in 1994 and had a site up at Wellesbourne. Now this is a picture of Huntercombe Abbey, which was very kindly given to me by the Mogfords because I could not find a photograph of it anywhere. And this is actually a table mat, is it not? But it does show you what Huntercombe... Eventually we did find a photograph of Huntercombe, and it is in the book. But that's what Huntercombe Manor looks like. It's now... And that, of course, is Newland Park, the house, the main house. And, of course, around it grew up all the different departments and, of course, student accommodation. And that's Missenden Abbey, with the famous ha-ha fence there, which of course is still a thriving institution.
That's very nice.
Halls of residence. Well, now, you need somewhere to put your students up who came from further than the locality. And the first was Godstow Lodge, up on Amersham Hill, and that was the first hall of residence. In 1954. That was eventually sold to Godstow School, and it's now part of Godstow School. Then, of course, we had John North Hall and the rooms up and the teaching areas up at the top of the hill. Then Newland Park, we've all mentioned, the halls of residence there. And then, of course, Brook Street halls of residence were opened in 1995, Green Street in 1999, Hewenden Park in 2009, and who knows what halls of residence we shall have in the future. And there's a photograph of Brian taken outside Brook Street when it was first opened. And Bucks New University itself, we've had new building since 2007. The upgradings to Alexandra Road started in 2007. And then, of course, the Uxbridge campus, which is the medical school now, which moved, the nursing school, which moved from the site in, what was the year? 2009, yes, from Newland Park. And of course, this building, the gateway, or the building there, was opened in 2009. And that's the very first part of the refurbishment of this building. It was the dining room, and I just had a coffee in there a little while ago, and there's an inset picture of our current director, Ruth. And that is the other building of the University College and the university, which is in Uxbridge. And there you have some pictures, some lovely pictures of the gateway. Now, I just thought I'd whip through the various titles that this college has had. From 1964, it became the High Wycombe College of Technology and Art. Then, in 1975, it suddenly became, for the whole county, the Buckinghamshire College of Higher Education. And because of that, we no longer offered O-levels and A-levels. And so the art section moved and joined the Amersham College of Further Education over in Amersham, and part of it is in Pembroke. No, I haven't quite finished that one, sorry. And then, of course, in '86, it became Buckinghamshire College, and finally in '87, the Buckinghamshire College. Now, the governors of the college very much wanted to move towards university status, and there were various undertakings which might have resulted in university taking. At one stage, they thought of becoming a polytechnic linked with Ealing College and Slough College. That didn't come into fruition, but that would have made the college large enough to be a polytechnic. And as you know, the polytechnics, many of them, like Hatfield, for example, went on to become universities. So the decision was made to link ourselves with Brunel University. And so from 1992 to 1999, this was actually a college of Brunel University. And we were able to, before that, we'd given CNAA degrees, and now we're able to award Brunel University degrees. In 1999, we finally achieved the status of Buckinghamshire Chilterns University College. And that was the interim phase towards university status. And I remember there was a major party in a big marquee in the grounds of Missenden Abbey to celebrate that momentous change towards university status, which is what the governors of the college wanted to happen. And at the second attempt, we became, in 2007, Bucks New University. And there we are. One stage, the prize givings were held in the town hall, which is now the Guildhall. Then they were held in the the main town hall. Then they were held partly in a marquee at Newland Park and partly in the wonderful new Swan Theatre. And of course now the degree ceremonies are all held in the theatre. And these are the people who've led this college, which is quite remarkable when you think that between 1891 and now, there are only that small number of people. Mr. Pycraft, who started, Hamilton Haddow, who also ran schools in the town, Arthur Gardam, who went off to war and came back and was the first headmaster of the technical school, William Davis, principal and headmaster between 1931 and 1960, then Mr. Everett, who became Dr. Everett and the principal between 1960 and 1991, then Brian, who became the director in 1991, and finally our director and now Vice-Chancellor, Ruth Farwell. What now for this new university? We've talked about the past, we've talked a little about the present, the future. Well, these are a selection, just a selection, of some of the things which we have done since becoming a university. I've just picked them at random, really. Links with sport, WASPs, Wycombe Wanderers. We supported the Olympic homecoming of our athletes. We've won numerous awards. For example, the Estates team won a major award in 2011. We've hosted many events, like the Police and Crime Commissioner debates last year. And we also hosted a broadcast of Any Questions quite recently. So we continue to use the facilities of the college for the use of the town. We've set up a furniture conservation company. There is a dual MBA with the American University in London. We've got a partnership with Hewlett-Packard. There is provision now of adult nursing education training right across London. And of course, most recently, up in Aylesbury, the foundation of the Buckinghamshire University Technical College. And there we have the University Shield, which shows all sorts of things about it. For example, the beech trees, the wills representing the furniture industry, the swans of Buckinghamshire, and the W for Wycombe there, which shows you, where the college is located. And there is our motto, through art and industry. Now, what of the future? Well, I've told you a little bit about the past, touched on the present. Ruth will tell you the future.
If only I had a crystal ball.